Good evening, everyone. Welcome to session 7. I'm sorry there's no graduation prize, but this is the conclusion of these Jewish dilemmas. Don't be concerned, there are plenty of other Jewish dilemmas. But I will conclude this evening with a little bit of hopefully some challenge and some inspiration. The topic this evening is freedom and responsibility. There is a tension between autonomy and obligation. In Judaism, freedom is understood to be part of a covenant. It's the space in which we choose to serve a higher moral and spiritual purpose. We choose to serve, which is different than having somebody choose for us to serve them. This is us accepting in the covenant to serve God and do God's commandments however we might interpret them. But we're not free from any kind of obligation. The Hebrew terms for freedom and responsibility are cherut and achariyut, and they sound similar to each other. They're both spelled with a chet, a resh, and a taf. Cherut is freedom, and this word famously appears in the Mishnah in Pirkei Avot, chapter 6, verse 2, where in reference to Exodus chapter 32, verse 16, and I know that you all have these committed to memory, which is why I just want to prove to you that you know them. But Exodus 32, just in describing the tablets of the law, the text says that the words were inscribed or engraved, and that word in Hebrew in Exodus 32 is charut. Chet Resh Vav Taf. But Pirkei Avot, centuries later, says, Al tikra charut ela cherut. Read not engraved. Read not that these letters are engraved in these tablets, but rather read charut as cherut. Read engraved as freedom, connecting freedom with the engraving of the tablets of the law. There are other related words that include the word for taking a break, chofesh, recess, or siesta is chofesh, and it's used more generally, cherut, for personal liberty. Well, cherut connotes spiritual or covenantal freedom. Cherut is something that we enjoy, but recognize that it comes with achariyut, with responsibility, from the root achar, meaning after or behind. And the etymology suggests that to be responsible, to have responsibility, is to stand behind our own actions, to stand after our actions for what follows. And it also evokes the word for solidarity, to be acharai, to be after or for one another. So freedom is not just personal freedom, like I can do whatever I want, that's chaos. Freedom and responsibility are part of the covenant that in order for me to be free, I have to be responsible. If I just enjoy the freedom and no responsibility, that's immature. Together, cherut and achariyut, freedom and responsibility, express this Jewish vision that the two are inseparable. We're free not to do whatever we wish, but we are free to respond faithfully to what we're commanded to do. But let's look at some of these texts. Exodus 10, verse 3. We know the first part of the verse, let my people go. Shalach ami, let my people go. But the next part of the verse is just as important. So that they may serve me. Let my people go that they may serve me. We have freedom for a purpose. Freedom in the Exodus is not an end point. It is the first step toward what we call avodah, or sacred service, sacred work. The Israelites were not liberated from slavery just to be lazy, just to be idle. The opposite of enslavement is not Sleep, the opposite of enslavement, is freedom to serve whom you choose, for covenantal responsibility. So this relationship between freedom and service is central in Judaism. We're going to look in a little while at the teachings of someone who was not Jewish, the teachings of Walter Brueggemann, who wrote a beautiful little book about Shabbat, about the Sabbath as spiritual resistance, and how in Brueggemann's ideology, the Exodus story paints for us a picture of what real freedom means. And it's not just chaos, it's quite the opposite. Service to God is a form of freedom rather than submission. And then this line from Pirkei Avot that I quoted a few moments ago: freedom through Torah. And it's the same paragraph where we get, don't read engraved, but read freedom, that we get this gem. There is no free person, Pirkei Avot says, except one who engages in Torah study. Rabbinic tradition identifies freedom with learning and with a moral discipline. Freedom is not lack of constraint. Torah provides a structure that channels our freedom into purpose. If left to our own devices, we will do horrendous things. There are 613 commandments in the Torah, and 365 of them say, thou shalt not do this, that, or the other thing. And the reason those commandments are there is because somebody was doing them, or somebody thought about doing it, or threatened to do it, or dreamt about doing it. Some of them, I don't know who would have thought up to. There are people who are much more creative than I am. But the fact that human inclination can lead us to do horrendous things, unless we are accountable to something, a system of law, to a society, unless responsibility, achariyut, keeps us in front of or behind someone else, keeps us in covenant with a community, we'll lose all of our mooring. So how do we know what's expected of us? By engaging in Torah study. This is a rabbinic paradox, because we think of these commandments as things that restrict us. 365 of those 613 tell us, don't do this. But those things give us freedom. They give us freedom from having to worry that we're living in a society where all of those things are acceptable. The fact that we are not permitted to murder each other frees us, at least theoretically, from worrying that somebody's going to come murder us. I mean, that'd be nice to work that way. But if everybody followed the law, we'd have peace. Freedom is not licensed to do things. Freedom in Judaism is mastering the self and controlling ourselves and curbing our worst instincts. By studying Torah, we join this divine partnership with God of making meaning in life, by elevating things that we might not ordinarily do and things we do ordinarily do into holy acts. So things we might not ordinarily do, reading Torah, studying, we elevate these things with blessings. Watching, restricting our diets during Passover. We're not going to do that on our own unless we're acculturated to do it, or we feel commanded, or the people with whom we share a home require it of us. But eating in general, you have to eat in order to live. And the responsibility that comes with the dietary laws in Judaism restrict but give us freedom. They restrict what we allow ourselves to eat, but they give us freedom within that restriction to be part of a covenantal community. And know that if you're strict about kashrut and your friend is strict about kashrut, there's a level of trust there. What stops me from trafing up my kitchen at home, from making my kitchen unkosher, is respect and love for my wife. That if it was just me, oh my God, you'd have all 10 plagues of the Seder going on in that microwave oven. But I don't want Ronit not to be able to eat the food. I don't want Ronit's sister not to be able to eat the food. So we keep the home kosher. That's freedom. She is free to eat in our house because she knows. Ronit's sister is free to eat in our house because she knows that we're keeping this covenant. So Plato was famous for saying that the unexamined life is not worth living. I think a rabbinic parallel could be that the unexamined life is not free. We're only free if we know what we're doing. Otherwise, it's just chaos. And Rabbi Jonathan Sacks, whom I'm fond of quoting, wrote that freedom without responsibility leads not to liberty, but to chaos. Because Torah is the framework that turns liberation into some kind of lasting moral order, a lasting moral order in which people cannot say, leave me alone, I'm free. It says, no, you're free, and certain expectations come with that. In the American context, we can think of freedom and responsibility this way. We're free, citizens of the United States who are 18 years of age are free, but not to break the law. And they're free to vote. So there is an obligation and an expectation that you have to choose to vote. You don't automatically vote. You have that opportunity, you have that freedom, but does everybody take advantage of it? No. So I always complain when I get my summons for jury duty, but not so deep down. I'm grateful to know that I live in a society where at least I have the opportunity to have, to be called to be part of a jury of my peers. That, as inconvenient as it is, it's a lot better than the alternative, which is never to be called for jury duty, because nobody is called for jury duty. If I say no, I don't want to do it, who else? Somebody else is going to have to do it. That's not freedom. That's irresponsibility. Now, if the attorneys don't strike me for cause, that's their problem. I just imagine the case is going to be something about, somebody who brought shrimp into a kosher restaurant, and that's going to say, do you believe you can judge this impartially? I say, I think I'm the perfect person to judge this case, but I'm going to need a taste test. Covenant as the fulfillment of freedom, still in the book of Exodus. Because it's about freedom, why not? Why not look at the book that's all about finding the way out of slavery? This is at Mount Sinai, right before Exodus 20, when we get the 10 Commandments. Now then, if you will obey me faithfully and keep my covenant, you shall be my treasured possession among all the peoples. Indeed, all the earth is mine, but you shall be to me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. These are the words that you shall speak to the children of Israel. This is God speaking to Moses. At Sinai, freedom is transformed into covenant. The people have just gotten out of slavery, and they're about to be obligated again. And the formerly enslaved Israelites become in this way a moral and spiritual community that is defined not by external oppression, not by the Pharaoh, who's already told them you cannot go, and then finally, exhausted, says go, and then chases them anyhow. This is not freedom, just freedom from that. It is freedom to choose responsibility, to be an adult. And adulthood sometimes is not that much fun, but it is freeing to have responsibility. I give the example often of paying taxes. I don't know anybody who loves paying their taxes, but why should you give thanks if you have to pay taxes?
Because you're making enough money to pay it.
You're making enough money that the government wants some of it. If you don't have to pay taxes, great. I struggle when I don't like it when I get a tax refund, because I don't like lending money to the government without any interest. But I'm grateful if I owe a little something, I say, okay, well, you know what? If I'm going to take advantage of the roads, and if I'm going to expect the army to protect the homeland and so forth, it doesn't come free. That's covenant and responsibility. If I expect everybody else to do it but not me, that's just irresponsibility. Covenant gives shape and meaning to freedom because it forces us to say, I am made in God's image and so is everybody else. And if I have unbounded freedom, and don't share purpose with everybody else around me, it's as if I'm a universe unto myself and I'm not really in covenant with anybody else. They're doing what they do, I'm doing what I do. And if my neighbor's house burns down, that's their problem. If my house burns down, I shouldn't expect my neighbor to come to my aid. And if I'm going to complain about paying taxes and refuse to pay taxes, I should not expect the fire department to come put out the fire at my house. Clergy have a tax benefit where parts of housing for clergy and military officers are tax-free. I always underestimate what I could take on that because I feel guilty about it. That's how you know I'm Jewish. But when I was being ordained, there was an accountant who came to speak to our class a few months before we were ordained to give advice. And he said, will have the option once in your career to opt out of Social Security. And because I pay my own Social Security. Usually the employer pays 7.65% and I pay 7.65. I pay my full Social Security. He said, clergy do not have to do that. You can opt out of the Social Security system. He said, but if you do, you shouldn't talk about being in covenant. So I don't know. I hope none of my classmates opted out of Social Security because chances are I'm never going to collect Social Security. It'll be gone or whatever. But who am I to stop, not to participate in something that's going to benefit other people? That's not covenant. That's selfishness. And that's not Jewish. Walter Brueggemann, who I believe is still living. Walter Brueggemann contrasts Pharaoh's Egypt with Shabbat. This is fascinating. He described, and it says, if you want to read his book, Sabbath is Resistance, Saying No to the Culture of Now. Came out 2014. It's available in paperback. It's an easy read. And he describes Pharaoh's Egypt as a society of endless labor and anxiety, where you were beaten mercilessly if you stopped working. It was 24/7 as opposed to 24/6. 24/7 is meant to exhaust because if you are not being productive, you're stealing from the Pharaoh. Everything belongs to the Pharaoh, and if you're not contributing to the Pharaoh's coffers, you are stealing from him. Versus Shabbat, which is the commandment to rest. It's a divine gift of release. This is what Walter Brueggemann says. He teaches that true freedom is the ability to stop producing, the ability to trust in abundance and to refuse the economy of fear. To trust in abundance, to say, I don't have to burn myself out physically and it's emotionally and spiritually in order to be a beneficial member of society. That my value is in my spiritual life and not only my physical production. By commanding rest, the God of Israel in Exodus is a counterbalance to Pharaoh, the God of Egypt. The Sabbath is not a restriction alone. There are 39 categories of work that the halachically observant Jews will not do on Shabbat. That have been interpreted to include using electricity, driving, but it's about lighting fire, traveling, and so forth. And we can see those as restrictions, or we can see those as liberation. In resting, we reclaim our humanity from the idols of productivity. The IDOLS. Instead of worshiping productivity, we can worship idleness. IDLENESS. Did I spell that right? Idleness instead of idolatry. And this can be enacted in so many different ways by not using our phones. I don't check work email on Shabbat. If there's an emergency, people call me, whatever, but I make it a practice not to do work emails on Shabbat. You may get a bunch of stuff from me Saturday night, but to me, that's how I separate the 6 days from this. I'm working on Friday night. I think I'd probably get in trouble if I didn't. If I said, "Well, I'm not working on Shabbat," I'd say, "Well, guess what? You don't have to bother coming in Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday either." Uh, Shabbat is a weekly act of resistance to every modern pharaoh. A weekly act of resistance to every modern pharaoh by saying, "This is a day when I live in covenant by defying conventional wisdom, which says that that idle hands are the devil's playground." No, idle hands lead to an idle mind, which leads to rest and refreshment. Shabbat is a weekly act of resistance, and we see people today who are quote unquote free who are enslaved, and I'm guilty of it. I see it, at the airport or in coffee shops or places where people aren't talking to each other. What are they doing? Sometimes I'll joke. I've been on elevators before where I see people who are obviously together and they're both looking at their phones, and I ask, "Are you texting each other?" And they laugh. Sometimes they are. Uh, I'm guilty of it as well. We have willingly enslaved ourselves to a culture that says I must be available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So what would it look like for you just to be enslaved 24 hours a day, 6 days a week, or 8 hours a day? Or I turn my phone to do not disturb from 9 p.m. to 7 a.m. And there are a couple of exceptions on there. My kids, my wife, Rabbi Spitzer, and who do you think another one is? John Arnold. And I hate it when he calls me, and I love John Arnold, but damn it, he can strike fear in your heart, the funeral director. When you get a phone call that says John Arnold Jr., sometimes if he's feeling especially merciful, he'll say, "No, nothing big, just wanted to call and tell you." Say, "It's not me, is it?" Two concepts of liberty from Isaiah Berlin: negative liberty and positive liberty. Now, Isaiah Berlin was Jewish, but I don't know how much his Judaism um, uh, impacts these things. But just like negative and positive commandments, you can look at a commandment as something that restricts you, or as a commandment as something that frees you. In Berlin's framework here helps us understand Jewish thought. The Exodus provides negative liberty, freedom from Egypt, and positive liberty, freedom for covenant. Isaiah Berlin was a Jewish philosopher, lived throughout most of the 20th century. He was a political theorist, and he was born in Latvia and emigrated to England as a child after the Russian Revolution. And he wrote his most famous essay, and this is from that. It's called Two Concepts of Liberty. For Berlin, both kinds of freedom are essential, but each of them carries a risk. Negative liberty can devolve into isolation or moral emptiness. This is the libertarianism. Just leave me alone. Well, I think libertarians would also like their home fires put out if there's they would also like to use the fire department. So it has its limits. Negative liberty can also mean people become hermits. They don't want to have, and I understand, some days I think if it wasn't for people, life would just be so easy. But people make life interesting. So wanting to be left alone, that's a freedom. But unless you want to go live in Montana and become the Unabomber, you may have to interact with other human beings. And positive liberty also carries a risk, because it can slip into tyranny if others claim to know what is best for you. And this is authoritarianism, fascism, communism, where the state knows better. The supreme leader knows best what's for you. And people will say cynically, I hope they're saying it cynically, that a despot who's benevolent is the best kind of leadership. No, it's like Ben Franklin said, a republic is the best if you can keep it. That there's always a risk with this positive liberty that that it can be overwhelming. So Berlin championed what we call liberal pluralism, the belief that there are many genuine values, sometimes in tension with each other, that there are dilemmas, and that no single system can capture all of them. We have here some moral humility, empathy, and an awareness of the tragic complexity of life. It's why it's so good not to oversimplify things. It's good. We need things to be categorized or explained so that they make sense. But if something is so simple that should be complex, don't buy it. That's how despotism comes about. Pharaoh was able to keep people in chains and enslaved by maintaining a system that only rewarded productivity. That's one extreme. Another extreme is chaos. So think of Lord of the Flies. People without any kind of restrictions, without any kind of moral compass, will go crazy and will devour each other. This is why in Jewish tradition we give thanks for the government, because what the rabbinic text says, we give thanks for the government, for if it did not exist, humans would devour each other. Just enough government, not too much. Now, for a Jewish audience, Isaiah Berlin's concepts of liberty resonate with the rabbinic understanding that freedom is bounded by covenant, and the choice is sacred, but it has to be directed toward moral responsibility. There's a philosophical bridge here between modern democratic liberty, as we understand it, and the covenantal freedom of Torah, the theme that's at the heart of this lesson, that living in a democratic republic, we are free. And who chooses what are the restrictions on us? By and large, we do, which is why it's, to me, miraculous that Judaism has survived the American experiment thus far, because it has been such a gift. This is the first society, as far as I know, in human history where Judaism could thrive without government interference. That was not the case. That's not the case in the state of Israel today. It was not the case in any of the kingdoms of Europe. Even places where Jews were fully enfranchised, there's a state religion, and Judaism is limited often by a chief rabbi. There's never been a chief rabbi in the United States. The fact that within that freedom we have been able to survive and thrive is pretty amazing. Bless you. Babylonia, the great diaspora community that produced the Babylonian Talmud, they didn't have religious liberty. They had two leaders of the Jewish community, the exilarch, in Aramaic called the Reish Galuta, or the head of the exile, and then there were rabbis, there were religious figures and civil authorities. We don't have any of that. Everybody who practices Judaism today, everybody who chooses to study Torah today, is doing it voluntarily. And that's pretty extraordinary, that when given the opportunity not to, some Jews still do. Some Jews do still choose to live in covenant. And we know that it has value. We know that it has value whether you practice the tradition punctiliously, as within Orthodoxy, or not. I think part of the reason why many young Jews are drawn to the rigors of Orthodoxy is because it makes sense to them. That it's hard to live in the gray areas. And it can be very comforting to live in a covenantal community where people take care of each other. I give the example a lot of, and Rabbi Spitzer and I have talked about this before, about Chabad. So Jay Rubin, who was here a few months ago, Jay Rubin was the head of the Jewish Federation here many years ago, and Jay's wife of blessed memory, when she was sick for years in Houston, Jay lived at the Chabad house. Imagine going to, you don't have to imagine it because I've experienced it. If somebody were to come here and need treatment at Altman for and need to stay for a month, where are they more likely to find hospitality? At Beit Ha'am or at Agudas Sachem? Agudas Sachem. It is a tragedy. It's a part of our reality that the covenantal community, the requirement for hospitality, which comes with, it's a double-edged sword, because if that person happens not to be Jewish, it's going to be a different thing. But so I don't want to gloss over that piece. But maintaining a covenant within the Jewish community is a safety net that we don't have within progressive Judaism. We take care of ourselves and we take care of each other, but in different ways. I'm much more comfortable writing a check than I am opening my home. And I imagine I'm not alone in that. So some contemporary voices about where Judaism falls on the spectrum between negative liberty and positive liberty. I'm going to give you, bless you, 3. Bless you. Do it one more time. The third one's free. This is about freedom and responsibility. 3 contemporary voices, and I've listed them here in chronological order. Rabbi Joseph Soloveitchik, known as the Rav, wrote this book, The Lonely Man of Faith, in 1965. Soloveitchik was brilliant. Like, that's the one I was waiting for. Humanity, he writes, seeks dignity through mastery, that's freedom, and sanctity through obedience, that's responsibility. Dignity through mastery and sanctity through obedience. Judith Plaskow, the pioneer of Jewish feminist writings. True freedom includes the voices of women and others historically excluded, expressing freedom into belonging. Freedom into belonging. That if it's a covenantal community and you are part of that covenant, but you are not represented in that covenant, you're not as free in that covenant as people who are represented in that covenant. This is a great eye-opening thing from Judith Plaskow and other feminist writers. I think it was last week I brought in Rachel Adler, who also shows us that there are voices that weren't missing at Sinai, but they are missing in our record of what happened at Sinai. And finally, Rabbi David Hartman, who, like Joseph Soloveitchik, was an Orthodox rabbi. Hartman was a student of Soloveitchik, and he wrote that freedom is not escape from command, but the opportunity to respond creatively to it. The opportunity to respond creatively to command. And that's what we do, is we interpret these commandments. Because if the commandment says, you shall not kindle fire on the Sabbath, we respond creatively to that. We can say, okay, I won't light fire. Or say, I'm not going to use the car because the way I interpret the internal combustion engine, I'm kindling fire. Or we can say, no, I understand that these 39 categories of work in there, time taught some kind of lesson, but it is not laborious for me to turn on a light switch. It's not a labor. I mean, a labor would be, rewiring my house on the Sabbath, which I refuse to do. I also refuse to do that on a Thursday. We respond creatively to commandments. But we respond creatively to commandments in covenant with each other. And this is at the heart of this tension of freedom and responsibility. When freedom, and now I speak specifically within the Jewish context, we have to have understanding and sometimes détente with each other about what that covenant is and what that freedom limits are. A perfect example of this is this building, freedom and responsibility. Thank goodness I was not here in 2012, otherwise this building never would have come together, because I'm such a pain in the tuchus about things that you needed Rabbi Spitzer's wisdom. About Rabbi Spitzer, what was the biggest sticking point about consolidation into a building? The kitchen. Da, 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 dun, da, da, dun, dun, dun. Isn't that how it goes? Why would isn't kashrut, isn't the system of dietary regulations meant to bring Jews together? Sure. in theory, that covenant and responsibility, that freedom in covenant allows for a community to remain together. I gave you an example in our own home where I, who do not personally keep kosher, have a kosher kitchen. I limit my freedom for responsibility. And why, of all things, would it be the kitchen? Because it's the thing that brings us together. I look at family photo albums, and my Aunt Tilly, I think she was born wearing an apron. There are people who just, we plan to, this week, Americans get a taste of what it is to be Jewish, and that's to stress over a holiday meal. But in putting together the cooperation to make Beit Ha'am, could not have just one kitchen. So having two kitchens, and Rabbi Spitzer told me the story about vacuuming the carpet. Was that the compromise? Is in having one social hall that after you use it, you vacuum the carpet, and then voila, it's magically kosher. I mean, there's a kitchen that I don't go into without supervision. Nobody goes in there unless there is somebody supervising it. That's part of the tension of freedom and responsibility. We give up some of our freedom in order to be responsible for each other. And we accept this responsibility so that we can be free with each other. And figuring out how much am I willing to compromise, not of my own integrity, but how much of my own convenience am I willing to sacrifice to make it possible for a community to exist. My late ex-in-laws lived in San Antonio, and they moved out into this is like 50 years ago, they moved out into the suburbs. And a few years later, the Orthodox shul moved from its old neighborhood into the neighborhood where my in-laws lived. And my father-in-law was one of the few people in the neighborhood who was Jewish, and the rabbi would always call him and say, "We need a tenth for a minyan." And I think they were so happy when they finally got enough people living in the neighborhood so they didn't have to call him anymore. But he always said he would go. That's a freedom. He was not ritually observant. But what's the value in going to be the 10th for the minyan? You support other people. Somebody for whom it is important. Their covenant commands them to say the mourner's Kaddish. And you have to, in that covenant, have 10 people, 10 men over the age of 13 to say Kaddish. It's 10 minutes or half an hour of your time. And what does it cost you? Nothing. Now, sometimes, depending on the mood, you may say, well, I'll send my wife. Which isn't going to do the trick because she's not going to count in the minyan. But in that moment, the freedom and responsibility say it's not my place to teach them a lesson about my values of pluralism and equality. We're Jewish. I have the opportunity to help somebody. I'm just going to do it, unless they want to sleep in my house for a month. Keep that tension. We have looked through competing interests, things that are. I purposely chose these topics because each of them is in tension with each other, and I don't want to live without any of them. I don't want to live without particularism and universalism, without tradition and innovation, faith and doubt, peoplehood and religion, survival and ethics, lament and hope, freedom and responsibility. I could have titled these things particularism or universalism, tradition or innovation, but the point is to have both. And balancing between them, that is what it is to occupy this space between the extremes of lament and hope. Or here, the extreme of freedom for me and nobody else, and I don't care what anybody else does, or responsibility where I give up everything in order to be responsible for all other people. We're not allowed to do either one of those things. We're not allowed in Judaism to give away everything. But why not? Isn't that selfless? Isn't that what St. Francis of Assisi? Did he give away everything? How do we know he wasn't Jewish? Well, first, he was Francis of Assisi. That was the first thing. Why aren't you allowed to give away everything in Judaism?
Charity yourself at that point.
Yes, then you become a burden to somebody else. We have freedom and responsibility, and our first responsibility, back to survival and ethics, our first responsibility is to ourselves. I cannot rely on miracles. This is a beautiful Talmudic story about why you're not allowed to stand on a shaky ladder. Well, what if I'm rewiring my house on that Shabbat and I need to stand on a shaky ladder? You're not allowed to stand on a shaky ladder because you can't rely on miracles. If that ladder has fallen every other time somebody's gotten on there, I can't say God will save me. You go with the preponderance of evidence. Don't rely on miracles. That's why your retirement plan ideally should not be winning the lottery. It'd be nice if it is, but you can't rely on it. We take care of ourselves, but not ourselves alone. Freedom and responsibility go hand in hand. Judaism does not resolve these tensions that we've discussed over the past 7 weeks. It sanctifies these tensions and says to be Jewish is to reflect on these things. Each pairing mirrors the inner drama of Jewish life, the struggle both to live in covenant with God and in living in covenant with humanity. It sanctifies the past, our tradition, and the future, our innovation, and our inner souls and the needs of the wider world. Jewish tradition doesn't ask us to choose one side or the other. It asks us to hold both and to have these things in conversation with each other. To be Jewish is to live in dialogue with God, with other people, with history, with the future, with our own conscience. The journey from Egypt to the Sinai Peninsula that occupies most of the Torah, and then to our own day, reminds us that freedom without purpose will dissolve into chaos. Freedom without purpose will dissolve into chaos. And responsibility without freedom becomes tyranny. Our challenge and a privilege that we have is to make this engraved tradition, this charut tradition, into cherut, into a path to freedom that's engraved not in stone, but engraved on our hearts. The tablets of the law, according to the Torah, these tablets, there were two sets. One that was inscribed directly by God, and one that was inscribed by Moses. And Moses had to inscribe the second set himself because he lost his temper after the golden calf and shattered the first set of tablets. But the tradition also says that Moses had to carry both sets of tablets in the ark, which I think is a beautiful lesson, that we have this tension between perfection and human reality, where we always strive to do better, but we never strive to be perfect. Only God can be perfect. But the way that we deal with our fallibility, then this sacred tension, this dilemma, is not to forget about our imperfections, but to embrace them. And imagine that Moses, for 40 years, they're schlepping, and the Levites, they're schlepping and they're hauling these tablets of the law. And Moses has to see in this ark his own imperfections. He's reminded every time they come into the tent of meeting that he shattered these tablets. What a gift from God. And I feel bad enough if I one time broke a piece of ceramic that Ronit loves, and occasionally I catch her looking at it and I know what she's thinking. Because then I tried to fix it and I put something on backward. That's my shattered laws and shattered tablets of the law. But Moses gives us a lesson there. We're always carrying, every one of us is carrying around shattered pieces of our world. And if we pretend like we're not, we're never going to fool ourselves, and we're sure not going to fool anybody else. And we don't have to resolve. Moses couldn't glue those tablets back together. You leave them shattered. And you carry them with you, but they're not, you don't carry them right in front of you. You don't carry them front and center. You keep them acharai. You keep them after me. Like, that is responsibility. Achariyut is carrying things after us. We put them behind us But sometimes we think of putting things behind us as forgetting them. Jews don't forget. We forgive, but we don't forget. Because when we forget, we make the same mistakes over and over again. And that's human nature. But to live in this tension, this dilemma, is to celebrate being imperfect. And the way that we get better is through freedom and responsibility. One without the other is meaningless. One is an extreme and the other is the other extreme. And we don't want to be extremists. They're no fun at parties. And God knows the Jewish people are fun. Just come to me during the days of Passover. It's a joy. Let my people go. Yes, let my people go to worship me so that our freedom means something. And that's all I got. 7 weeks. Rabbi Spitzer, your rebuttal.
Well, wonderful second. I was really taken by Soloveitchik's comment where he talks about humanity seeks dignity through mastery and sanctity through obedience. I think that's really a hand in glove kind of thing. It's lovely.
Very good. You can't go wrong with a good Soloveitchik quote, unless he's talking about something with which you disagree, in which case he was wrong.
David Hartman.
Not at the Hartman Institute, but at various Hillel things, yeah.
The early years of attending the Jewish Federation, National Jewish Federation meetings, he used to teach a session at each one, and there was no question, even 40 years ago, he was a modern Orthodox rabbi. This line about creativity, where he found a way to stay within the law the way he interpreted, but to make plenty of room for everybody else.
Yeah, he was extraordinary. David Hartman, who also he had the foulest mouth, not just of any rabbi or philosopher I've ever heard, possibly any human being. But David Hartman.
We didn't exhibit that.
No, and his father was Shalom Hartman, and David Hartman founded something called the Shalom Hartman Institute. It's in Jerusalem and New York, and David Hartman's son Daniel Hartman still leads it, and they continue to produce great literature. Some of the best contemporary Jewish thought is coming out of the Shalom Hartman Institute, and it is pluralistic. Other people other modern scholars that I've mentioned, including contemporary feminist theologians, for example, do work through the Shalom Hartman Institute. Highly recommend it.
Quick question. Is there a term for that state after Pesach, but before Shavuot? The people have been freed, but they haven't arguably formally accepted the Torah yet. So it's this kind of open-ended potential, but it hasn't solidified. Of course, it's okay, that period is counting the Omer, but is there a term for that sort of not converged state?
I don't know. It's between Pesach and Shavuot, while you're counting up to the Omer. I don't know. I mean,
Set free, of course, that's a little bit different, maybe because there are the promises to the Avot, there's the promise to Abraham, so it's not completely in a vacuum, so to speak, but it's not in the final state that we know it's going to get to.
yeah, they don't have Torah yet, but they don't have. They're free. Though there's also there is the concept in Jewish exegesis of ein mukdam ve'ein muchar, that there's no early or late in the Torah, which is why Abraham could do things like serve milk and meat to his guests. Ein mukdam ve'ein muchar. There's no early or late. That there's no such thing as an anachronism in the Torah. So they had the covenant. It just hadn't been revealed yet. But I'm going to think about that, because that stage, that step, those 7 weeks between Pesach and Shavuot, that's an important period of time.
I mean, it also maybe could apply, because I was trying to think of where would this tension be embodied in ritual, and maybe something could be, what if we're revising, for example, the question of should women count towards a that could be a major difference, or are women obligated in time-bound mitzvot? Can women, put on a tallis? Maybe, I don't know, this gets to like the practical implementation of like, well, what does the ritual committee say? But when renegotiating that boundary, it's almost like that in-between state, because you still are free, you're still obligated, but what does it actually converge to in practice? It's up in the air.
There is, I think what Matthew here is describing is a difference between obligation and permission. That so for example, there's a teaching that Rashi, the commentator in the 11th century, that his granddaughters put on tefillin, that they wore the phylacteries. And people are quick to quash that. Because what's the halachic, the Jewish argument traditionally for why women do not wear the phylacteries or wear a talit or wear a kippah? It's not just that they're not commanded. Why aren't they permitted?
Well, because you can't say that, you can't put them on with the bracha at night. You can only do it during the day because it says you should look at them. So that's what that means.
So you have to be commanded.
Time-bound mitzvah. Women are exempt from time-bound mitzvah in the traditional interpretation. And that's why.
Well, you're not allowed to. You're not supposed to wear the rabbinic tradition says no cross-dressing, that except on Purim, that they interpret, I think narrowly, they interpret the talit to be a men's garment, and so what women shouldn't wear it. But it comes down to if freedom and responsibility. If you are responsible to do something, you're commanded to do it. Are you also free to say, no, I'm not going to do it? And if you're not commanded to do it, are you also free to choose to do it? And that's a tension that different communities interpret it differently. There are places where you'll go where it is expected that every man will cover his head, whether he is Jewish or not. And there are places where it's not an issue. There are places you can go to synagogues where it is required that every person, regardless of gender, covers their head. There are places where it's required that every Jewish person, regardless of gender, over the age of 13, puts on a talit on Shabbat morning. Those are communal standards, and that's why I say this freedom and responsibility happens within context of community. Now, what if I go to this place and it's not my custom? On this, Jewish tradition is very clear that minhag ha'ish, minhag hamakom, that the custom of the person should be the custom of the place. So if I go to a synagogue and I'm on my high horse about, well, I don't want to wear my kippah, then I shouldn't go there. Because what if it's my custom not to take off my shoes when I go into a house, but I'm in Japan? Minhag, the custom of the person should be the custom of the place. That is giving up some of my freedom in order to be in covenant. So go, have the tension, enjoy, and whatever your custom is at Thanksgiving, if it's homemade stuffing and instant mashed potatoes, which I got in trouble one year because I'm from Akron, I love instant mashed potatoes, and Ronit told me that under no circumstances was I allowed to bring those to a family Thanksgiving because some things are sacred. All right, thank you, everybody. Yeah.